War. For as long as humans have been walking in an upright posture, we have had the propensity to pick up the nearest club and beat our fellow man across the head with it. Differences in appearance, religion, location, jealousy, power play, or because the lager was a bit on the strong side that particular evening. Either way, over the last 120 years, the world has been thrown into the fires of hell twice over and narrowly escaped nuclear destruction once. And with the recent battles breaking out in Ukraine and the Middle East, as well as threats in Taiwan, things are looking a bit bleak. I appreciate that this is a bit of a rough watch, but for the next episode, it'll be slightly more light-hearted. Before we get into 4 ghostly stories from World War II, if you like this content and would like more, please give the video a like by hitting that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. Now, Story 1. The Eastern Front saw some of the most horrendous fighting of the whole war. Russian fighters charging forth and pushing the Germans back in the ridiculous temperatures of the Russian tundra. In order to combat the German onslaught, Stalin ordered the rapid production of the Russian tank division. Many of the tanks were destroyed in these brutal battles, and unfortunately, many of the tank crews incinerated as a result. In the years after World War II, several people have reported the sound of thundering tank tracks approaching across open fields with nothing in sight. The feeling of the ground rumbling underfoot and the sound of squealing metal. And on at least one occasion, a Russian T-34 tank broke through the undergrowth in front of a couple who were touring Russia. They watched in horror as the screaming war machine broke through the bushes on one side of a road and broke through the other side, but noticed that the vehicle was transparent. As they ran to see it travelling off into the field, they were shocked to see an empty field. The tracks were there, and a noise was disappearing into the distance, but the field was empty. Story 2. Between the years of 1939 and 1945, several countries attempted to remain neutral whilst war ravaged the world. These countries included Sweden, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. Switzerland in particular had a tough time of it, due to the fact that it is bordered by countries caught up in the war. Axis countries, Italy, Germany, and Austria, almost completely surrounded on 3 sides, while the remaining border is connected to France, with Liechtenstein briefly poking its head in the middle. Although officially neutral, Hitler was not wholly satisfied with the arrangement and launched an attack. This resulted in a small contingent of British soldiers being dispatched to Switzerland to protect its borders. It was in a small mountain village where this unusual tale comes from. The small contingency of British troops arrived and quickly set up defences, but not long after they arrived, strange things began to happen. It began with the disappearance of innocuous items such as scrap wood or tarps from gardens. From here, it escalated from the mundane item to items of value from people's houses. Relations with the locals started to become more strained, as naturally the soldiers came under suspicion. That was until the disappearance of objects took a turn for the sinister. One quiet day, the village erupted in chaos as a family made the soldiers aware that their child had disappeared. The soldiers immediately set to work looking for the child, but with no success. But this was only the start. Several more children disappeared over the coming weeks, and despite the efforts of the soldiers and the residents, no trace was found. a consensus began to form that there was something in the hills picking off the children one by one. That was until a British soldier by the name of Reginald disappeared from the barracks. Once again, the soldiers and civilians launched a search effort to find the missing, but to no avail. Several more children disappeared until one evening, several soldiers were patrolling the quiet town, when one of them spotted a dark figure watching from the window of a nearby house. As he lay eyes on it, the figure darted from the window and out of the back of the house. Immediately, the soldiers gave chase through the town and out into the wilderness, when suddenly the figure disappeared. The soldiers, bewildered at the sudden disappearance, began searching the area. After a short search, one of the soldiers found a hole in the field obscured by the snow. As he peered in, a shot sounded out in the night, causing the soldier to duck for cover. The rest of the soldiers ran to his defense. As shots rang out, one by one the troops fired into the hole until the landscape turned silent. Plucking up the courage, one of them climbed into the hole, only to be met with utter horror. Just inside the entrance, he found the body of Private Reginald, with a bullet hole through its chest. But he hadn't been the one shooting at them. The body was long dead and cold to the touch. Beyond the body of the private, however, would be a sight that would stay with the soldier for the rest of their lives. The bodies of 7 children were identified in the cave. All had been partially eaten by whatever had run into the cave. And most unnerving of all was the fact that the creature that fired on them had vanished. In a man-made cave, with no exit other than the one that the troops had entered in. Following this encounter, no more children went missing from the village, and the troops left. It is unclear what happened to the creature. Story 3. During World War II, young men were conscripted and sent to the meat grinder of war. Since most of the men of fighting age were sent abroad, the women left at home had to take over a myriad of jobs. From factory work, food production, evacuation officers, as well as many others. Even good old Queen Lizzie was an ambulance driver during the war. One of the roles during the war, certainly during the Blitz, was that of a fire watcher. A fire watcher's role was to alert fire brigades to where fires were and to assist in putting out the fires in whatever way possible. Not an easy task in the face of such large-scale devastation, especially when the Luftwaffe were launching incendiary bombs on built-up urban areas. Rosina French was a fire watcher in Islington, and much like the rest of London, Islington was heavily bombed. Rosina, however, had a much more difficult job than most of her colleagues. Her area of work happened to be near a cemetery which, to some, may be unnerving enough. But for Rosina, she occasionally felt that she was being watched. On a number of instances, she looked over at the desolate graveyard, with the glow of the fires in the background. And as though she summoned it with her glance, an elongated pale figure appeared and looked directly at her. The sight froze her to the spot, and as she watched, the figure would rise up and disappear. She believed that this figure was the soul of the recently deceased passing on. A belief that provided her with great comfort. Story 4. In 1944, a major offensive was launched against the Axis powers in a very dramatic way. British, American and Canadian soldiers were all thrown into hell on the beaches of Normandy before pushing forward towards Paris and then on to Germany. During this time, soldiers would spend their days walking for hours, broken up with sporadic fighting. During the evenings, if they were lucky, they'd find an abandoned house or partially destroyed church, but more often than not, the troops would be sleeping in dugouts and trenches, especially if they were on a mission. It was in one of these trenches where a Canadian soldier by the name of William Byrd encountered an unnerving but strangely comforting experience. Will was sleeping when he felt someone touch his hands. He jerked awake, thinking that it was a member of his squad alerting him to a shift change, or worse, warning him of enemy activity. But he gasped as he saw the face of his brother Steve. He nearly shouted with excitement when he saw him, since Steve had died 2 years prior. Steve placed his hand over Will's mouth to stop him calling out, before saying, "Get your gear." He then led Will onto the battlefield before disappearing into thin air and leaving Will bewildered and exposed to the gunfire and noise. He snapped out of his stupor and ran back to his trench. When he arrived back, however, he was shocked to see that the trench was completely destroyed by enemy artillery. The spirit of his brother had saved him from destruction. Now, I appreciate that this is a bit of a darker episode, but after a bit of research, I will be doing another episode on war, but slightly funnier stories that we don't ever hear about, either from military gaffes, to entertainment during the ranks, or from strange, alternative ways of fighting. Either way, they should make you laugh, and it'll be a little bit lighter after this one. Well, that's all from us here at Dark Entertainment. I hope that you've enjoyed the episode. And if so, please give us a like, subscribe, comment, a big thumbs up. But if you would like to speak to me, feel free to message me on X or on Facebook, or if there's a topic that you would like me to cover, a place that you would like me to see, or a story that you'd like me to look into, feel free to email me at dark_entertainment@outlook.com. And remember, stay dark, stay creepy, and always laugh. Ta-ta!